The Waco History Podcast is sponsored by Brotherwell Brewery on Historic Bridge Street in Waco.
Cross the Brazos at Waco, ride hard and I'll make it by dawn. Cross the Brazos at Waco, I'm safe when I reach San Antonio.
All right, well, we're back with the Waco History Podcast. I'd like to thank my guest today that's joining me, Major John Householder. And I met Mr. Householder in last fall. He is a Vietnam veteran here in our community, but he was also very involved in the creation of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial here in Waco that sits at the corner of University Parks and Washington Avenue, right as you come off the bridge there as you're coming out in downtown. If you look to your right, not only is it a memorial to the Vietnam War, it's a memorial to all armed services, all our veterans who have served here in Waco in all branches of the military. And so I thought I'd have Major Householder in with me today. Thank you for joining me today. We met in the fall, as I said, and then I had you take my Vietnam War class down through the memorial, and I thought the community doesn't know enough about that particular site and the history of that particular site, and I thought I'd have you on to talk a little bit about that. But I'd like to go back and talk a little bit about your service in the military and kind of the Vietnam War era. I always like to assume the person listening is a student, and if they're a student, they were born years after the Vietnam War. And oftentimes the information they get is from other sources like movies and TV and things like that. And so I'm wondering if you could help describe for a listener like that just the era in which we talk about in the 1960s and how Vietnam kind of encountered your story.
I grew up in upstate New York. Starting with the 7th grade on, we lived in a small village 12 miles north of Utica, which is right on the Mohawk River, right to the central part of the state. And when it came time to pick a college, I wanted to go to a small school, and St. Lawrence came to mind, and I applied and was accepted. I was also applied to 2 others, was accepted, but I wanted a really small school. So that's where I went. And one of the courses available was ROTC. So I enrolled in ROTC, and the first 2 years were the basic course, and if a person enrolls for the second 2 years, they are committed upon graduation at some point to go into active duty as a commissioned officer. So I did go into the advanced course, and was fortunate enough to have graduated as what they call distinguished military graduate, which meant that if I wanted to serve my first assignment stateside, I could pick any unit, which was good. Between our junior and senior years, we had a 6-week ROTC summer camp at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and so we were exposed to the 82nd Airborne Division there. Matter of fact, one of the things we did was to go to their jump school. At that time, both the 82nd and the 101st have jump schools right there on their post, in addition to the main jump school at Fort Benning. So we went to that jump school and saw some demonstrations, and we even got to jump out of the 34-foot tower, which is basically trains a person on how to exit an aircraft. And they also took us out to a drop zone, and we observed a drop of a good number of troops. So that got me interested in airborne. And then one of our instructors, at that time, Major Robert Bentley, was a veteran of the 17th Airborne Division in World War II. And so that furthered my interest. So when it came time to pick a unit, I decided I'd like to go to the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. So I got there in July. I graduated June the 3rd or 4th, I think it was, and took a month. I had up to a month before I had to report, so I decided to take that month and get in good physical condition. So I did, and then reported to Fort Campbell. And they at that time they had battle groups, not brigades or battalions, but they had battle groups, which were made of 5 infantry companies. And I was in the 502nd, and they had what they called a pre-back platoon, pre-airborne, pre-basic airborne, and so myself and some other lieutenants worked out with them. And we went to jump school in July of 1961, and 2 weeks of ground training. And week number 3 was the jump rake, 5 parachute jumps, and we earned our wings. Then myself and 2 other lieutenants in that battle group went down to Fort Benning, Georgia for the infantry officer basic course, the orientation course, which lasted 8 weeks. And we had an option to go to the Ranger School. I wasn't particularly enthused about that, but they said, "Come on, let's go to Ranger School." So I said, "Okay." So that was a 9-week course in Fort Benning. The mountain phase is outside Dahlonega, Georgia, and the swamp phase is Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. So we got through that, and I was fortunate enough to have been won a Ranger tab, which means I was a qualified Ranger. So went back to the 101st, and was a platoon leader, and we did various routine maneuvers, exercises out in the field. I was the battle group staff duty officer. I think it was a Saturday night. I started getting weird phone calls for division. How many troops are in that battle group that are rigger qualified, know how to pack parachutes? Another phone call: how many of your vehicles were deadlined? And I just wrote the information down, and then the following Monday, here comes President Kennedy announcing the Cuban Missile Crisis, and things got pretty tight there.
Yeah, particularly where you were stationed down in the south. Yeah.
We were the 82nd and the 101st were part of the Strategic Army Corps, and each month the battle group was on ready reserve. You had the ready reserve, which was the battle group, and then 2 of their companies were on immediate ready reserve, which I think was supposed to be able to deploy in 24 to 36 hours notice, and then the rest of the battle group would follow. And with the being on jump status, you had to jump at least once every 3 months in order to qualify for jump pay. And so I jumped in early October, and then with the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was announced no more parachute jumps. They needed those parachutes in case we went, which obviously we didn't go. But
so what are your memories from that period in October as you were kind of watching? And
well, it was we were just kind of I was sitting on pins and needles, and just packed up my gear in case we had to go, and. So anyway, that jump covered me October, November, December. And in December, things were pretty well quieted down. The things had settled. Khrushchev was removing missiles and so forth. And on December the 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, our company went out to go with a company from the 187 battle group on a live fire exercise. We would monitor them, make sure nobody got out in front and stuff like that. So there was company commander and the assistant operations officer were in the cab of the truck with the driver, and myself and another lieutenant and a bunch of non-commissioned officers were in the back. We were driving out there, and it was a dirt road early in the morning. It wasn't even light yet, and we apparently sideswiped a truck coming the other way, and I went flying out, and I hit the road on my stomach, and I said to myself, "I'm being drugged," so I let go. I stopped being drugged, but I could tell my left arm was really hurt. I got up, and the truck was maybe 15, 20 yards down there somehow the engine was gunning, and there were bodies laying all over the place. And I said, "Oh man, it's bad." Turns out I was the one that was most seriously hurt with my arm, and so I was evacuated to the hospital, and they operated on my arm and put on a forearm cast. So that came off in February. Then I had to go through physical therapy, and I couldn't jump. I wasn't cleared to jump until the following June. So that covered for April, May, June. So I missed jump pay for January, February, March. So that was $330, and you can't make that up.
Yeah.
And then because I had a broken arm, I couldn't be I went on convalescent leave for a little bit, but then when I got back, I couldn't be a platoon leader with my arm in a cast, so they made me the battle group motor officer, which is kind of overseeing the motor pool and a lot of vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
And then they reorganized, became the battalion S2, and in February, I think it was February of 1964, I got orders for the 1st Special Forces Group on Okinawa. It kind of surprised me. I knew I was going someplace.
What did you think? Did you think you were going to Europe? Or
Well, I really didn't know, but I thought at that time, naively, that if you're going to go to Special Forces, you had to volunteer for Special Forces. But apparently all you had to do was be airborne qualified.
Mm-hmm.
So I reported to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and went through a preliminary basic course, the Counterinsurgency Staff Officers course, 4 weeks long. And that was a true gentleman's course. There was no field exercises. There weren't even any tests. We just had reading materials, and we sat in lectures. And it was very interesting, I think very helpful, because they talked about communist revolutionary warfare, wars of national liberation. We studied all that stuff, Mao Zedong, and Marxism and whatnot. And I have looked back in my earlier years and thought if every American had gone through that course, they would have had a lot of different attitude toward Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
But then I finished that up and arrived in Okinawa in August the 1st, and there were 5 other first lieutenants on the plane. It was a charter, 707 charter jet, just carrying people to Okinawa, military people. And we got to the 1st Special Forces Group headquarters, and they said, okay, Householder Hadley, you're going to A Company. Overcash and I can't remember the other guy's name. You're going to B Company. Baird and Briggs, you're going to D Company. We got 6 A teams in pre-deployment training for Vietnam. That did not surprise me a bit.
Yeah.
I pretty well knew when I got orders for that, I was going to be wound up in Vietnam. So,
yeah, so this is August of '64. So when troops went in the spring, the advisory mission had kind of transitioned to.
Well, there were still a lot of advisors.
Yeah.
In middle part of October, our A team deployed.
Uh-huh.
While I was in that pre-deployment training, I was living in a BOQ off of the compound where the barracks were, and I would eat breakfast it was an A Company for a Special Forces Group. I'd eat breakfast there, and I went in one morning in August, latter part of August, and they had a pile of Pacific Stars and Stripes newspapers there, and I picked up a newspaper, and it said 4 advisors went down fighting, the headlines, and the first sentence was, tall infantryman First Lieutenant William D.H. Reagan was last seen firing a machine gun. He was one of myself and 2 others went through jump school, ranger school, and all were in the 502nd together. And that just hit me like the proverbial ton of drips, and I was numbed for several days.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget
that
experience. So, in Vietnam, we in our pre-deployment training, one of the things we do, we had Vietnamese language classes. Was taught by a young Vietnamese lady, and I don't think we became very proficient in it. But when we got to Vietnam, we were assigned to Poli Krong in Con Tum Province, which was about 17 kilometers northwest of Con Tum City, and maybe 20 miles east of the border of Laos and Cambodia in South Vietnam. And our troops there, what they call a strike force, or CIDG, Civilian Irregular Defense Group, were all mountain yards.
Okay.
I equate the mountain yards in Vietnam to the American Indians.
Yeah, so indigenous peoples in Vietnam. Yeah.
The Vietnamese, our counterparts were the Vietnamese Special Forces Detachment. Their commanding officer was a Vietnamese captain, but their executive officer was a Girai. That was one of the mountain yard tribes. And our companies were part Girai, part Benar, part Zedang. And he could speak all three of those languages.
Mm.
And the camp we went to had been overrun, I think it was the previous June, either June or July the 4th. So that was something that got our attention.
Yeah.
We were very attentive to camp security and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So we conducted ground operations, and really, for the time we were there, from October to January, we had one minor probe, and that was it. And then we were told they were closing the camp, which I would say personally didn't disappoint me, because the back of the camp was to a river, and the camp was strategically or tactically not very defensible.
Mm.
You stand there, look at the camp, and look around, and you see high ground all around the camp.
Yeah.
And so then they moved us out to Jiangkan, which is the capital of Kanhua Province. Kanhua is where Nha Trang is, that's where the 5th Special Forces Group headquarters was.
Yeah.
And we had a pilot mission of training regular force and popular force troops. So that's what we did until April, when 6 months was over.
I see.
So that was my first tour.
That was your
6 months.
first tour, and I know you did. Then you did 2 more years, 2 more tours.
That is correct.
6 month, and then 2 1-year tours.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about the next 2 tours. I know they're quite different than that
Yeah,
initial assignment. Yeah.
I finished the infantry officer career course at Fort Benning, Georgia, which I think was 39 weeks long, if I'm not mistaken, and got orders for the 196th Light Infantry Brigade. It was an American unit. It was a separate brigade in Vietnam, and so I reported in. They had been in Tay Ninh, which is in the third Corps, which is Saigon in, but then they moved them up to around Chu Lai, which is in the 1st Corps.
Mm-hmm.
And our initial mission was the 3 battalions, was to surround the Chu Lai Air Base. And among other, besides conducting operations against the Viet Cong and even the NBA, was to try to protect the air base from rocket attacks.
Okay, so just so folks who are listening, Vietnam, which of course now is not divided, but we have a North Vietnam and a South Vietnam and a DMZ, and you're up in the northern area of that southern of South Vietnam.
Yep.
And so you're in an area, I would assume, where there's a lot more activity than this area you were initially in with your initial tour.
Yeah, just as it turned out.
Mm-hmm.
So we were there, and then at a certain point, we were told we were going to move north. So we moved north to maybe 50 miles or so, and then west into an area. Our battalion commander said that's Indian country, because there's main force Vietnamese unit, Viet Cong units, and NVA, North Vietnamese Army units there. And the 3 battalions had fire support bases on top of hills, and they each had a 105 millimeter howitzer battery assigned to them, so that those howitzer batteries could be mutually reinforced. They were within range. We were in center, and we could fire and help west, and west could fire and help us, and then east was same thing with east. And so at that time I was a headquarters company commander, so I was limited to the fire support base.
Mm-hmm.
And we got some of our units got some pretty heavy firefights and so forth. And then in I guess it was April, they moved us north. We didn't really know what was going on outside of Way. And then for our battalion, they moved us all the way up to just south of the DMZ. And I was sent up there we were going to become under the operational control of the 3rd Marine Regiment, 3rd Marine Division. So I was sent up there to be the initial liaison officer. And then our battalion commander came up and basically they said, okay, you're going to go in there and occupied this particular hamlet, and there's another hamlet, Neha, which is north of there, which is probably has NVA in it. You need to take that hamlet.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got back there, and I was, like I say, I was at that time I was a battalion intelligence officer, so I was there with the battalion headquarters, and our companies went up to take Neha, and that was quite a battle.
Mm.
Finally got rid of them, and it was hard to dislodge them. They finally called in the Air Force Forward Air Controller. Finally called in some Marine jet fighters with 2,000-pound bombs to just knock them out.
Talk a little bit about the challenges of working. This is counterinsurgency still at the hamlet level, where you're trying to work to secure some of these hamlets. What were the challenges there?
Well, the second time I was there, we really didn't get involved with the hamlets. There's that one hamlet, Neha, that we were told to take it, and our troops did and defended it, and then we were pulled out on May the 16th, and finally wound up going back as far as Support Center. Until I got orders to come back to the United States. But my third tour, when I came back to the United States, I was assigned. I put in for the requested to be assigned to the U.S. Army Special Warfare School at Fort Bragg. I wanted to, since I was Special Forces qualified, I wanted to go teach at the Unconventional Warfare Department, and among other things, get back on jump status.
Yeah.
And so when I got there, the chief of staff looked at my personnel form, and he said, "You majored in psychology in college. You're going to the Psychological Operations Department." I didn't want to do that. I said, "I need to get back on jump status, sir." And said, "No problem. We got plenty of jump slots there." I don't know how they justified them, but they did. So I taught for 2 years at Psychological Operations Department, and I got a lot more insight, or maybe just added to my insight about counterinsurgency and wars of national liberation, and things of that nature. One of the courses I taught was a 1-hour course on the Chuhoi program, which was the program to try to induce Viet Cong to surrender and come over and join the ARVN Army, the Vietnam forces. So I taught a 1-hour course on that, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And
did you like teaching psych ops? Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It was interesting. It was good, and like I said, I got back on jump status, which I was appreciated. And then in August of 1968, I'm sorry, August of 1970. I got there in August of 68. August of 1970, I got a call from the infantry branch saying, "You're due to go back to Vietnam one more time." And I had, in the meantime, I had gotten married. The lady that I married, her husband was a captain there in the Psychological Operations Department, and he was a private pilot. And one day, the wife of the administrative officer there at that department, wanted to go see her dad in Eastern Tennessee, and he said, "I will fly you if you pay for the gas." So he flew her there. And coming back, he got caught in a snowstorm and wound up hitting him out. And they appointed me to be her survivor assistance officer. Now they call them casualty assistance officers. So my job was to get the personal affairs wrapped up, help her to clear quarters, and put in for various insurance claims and stuff like that, and arrange for transportation. She lived here in Texas. Her family lived in Belton, and so we got her on a plane to fly out of Fayetteville, and that was April. He was killed in February of 1969. In April, then she left in April, and in June she came back and visited a bunch of the wives there in the department, and we went out on a couple of dates, and she invited me to come to. She had purchased the house in Austin, so she invited me to come to Austin and to go on leave. And when I did, we got engaged.
I'm starting to figure out how you became a Texan now.
Yeah, that's so we got engaged, and I went back in December of 1969. We got married, packed up the family, back to Fort Bragg, and then, like I said, I got in a conversation with the infantry branch in Washington D.C. They said you need to go to Vietnam one more time, and I said, was there some way I can delay it or something like that? You know, I gave them the story about my wife being a widow and so forth. And so here's what we can do. We can send you to the U.S. Department of State Foreign Service Institute for 18 weeks for training, and then you can go over and become a district senior advisor in Vietnam.
Uh-huh.
So that sounded great. So myself and one of the other majors there, we both went to that same course. And then we deployed to Vietnam. And I wound up at the, excuse me, the advisor to Cao Lan District, Kinh Trong Province. A province in Vietnam is like a state in the United States. A district in Vietnam is like a county. And then below district, you have villages and hamlets. But the villages are a geographical area. Well, the hamlet is a built-up area with housing and maybe a marketplace or something like that. And there may be a school there, an aid station, something like that. And you had several hamlets would make up a village, and then several villages would make up the
province.
Yeah. Well, the district. Several hamlets make up
and
the
then,
district.
And several districts would make up a province. Yeah.
So the Cao Lan district was it was right on the Mekong River, and it had 12 villages and 64 hamlets, and there existed at that time what they called HES, or Hamlet Evaluation System, and that was a system where they had a bunch of criteria, and advisors would fill out, answer the questions about, is there a marketplace in each village, each hamlet? Is it accessible? Can people travel freely from one hamlet to another, or to inter-village? Are there schools? Are there medical facilities? Are people relatively safe? And that's a very brief description of it. It's a rather lengthy.
So you're doing more than just determining how pacified that hamlet is. It's more of a survey than that. Yeah.
And so it turned out that the Cao Lan district was rated A. You had A, B, C, D, and V Viet Cong controlled. I think that was the way it went. But Cao Lan was all A, and all the hamlets and villages were rated A. So it was possible to drive around on main highways, just myself and my interpreter, myself and the sergeant that worked with me, and the interpreter. And but that doesn't mean that just because there were 8 that everything was okay.
Yeah.
They had 7 regional force companies throughout that district, and I think there was one popular force platoon at each hamlet, and one of the topography was such it was perfectly flat, just about perfectly flat, but it had a lot of canals, and
because this is down on the delta of the Mekong.
In the delta, yeah. And when I would go with my interpreter, and maybe my sergeant would go with me to visit a hamlet or a village, we were able to get on a motorboat, and I have my map there, and I just tell them where to go, and I just follow around. It's just kind of reading a map of a city, something like that. We made it a point, wherever we went to visit, when we returned, to take a different route back, so that we didn't come across a place where the VC might be. They watch us going in and set up the ambushes coming back.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the companies got hit one night and pretty much overrun, and that was a pretty messy situation.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, about the Hamlet evaluation system, I reported that, but didn't change the rating. And then we had another Popular Force platoon outpost was hit at night, and we were out there the next morning. You could see where the VC were crawling underneath the wire up to the grass, and they would get up. It was a triangular-shaped fortification with a berm, and the VC apparently got in there and got close enough and just threw hand grenades in and got up on that and killed a lot of people and stuff.
Mm.
And I was getting pretty frustrated with the district chief. He didn't seem to care much about what was going on. And we had a couple other instances where those were attacked, and I examined the situation. They were all being attacked when there was no moon, which makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah. So the enemy wasn't visible. Yeah.
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 And but like I say, I reported all those on. I think I had the basic Hamlet evaluation system was done years before I got there,
Mm-hmm.
and I think just had a quarterly upgrade. And so I reported these things, and it really didn't affect. I was kind of surprised it didn't affect the evaluation. And like I say, the Kowloon district was in Kien Phong province. That was also where the Kowloon City, which was the province capital.
Mm-hmm.
So I was living with the province advisory team in a compound. And one night we heard a boom, and some of us got in jeeps and down there was just an open air restaurant, and the VC had come in and blew a broom,
Mm-hmm.
set off a bomb, and I remember the little baby was killed and a couple other people were wounded, but it didn't change the thing. And before I left, as a matter of fact, in that fall, I was feeling pain in my stomach area, and I thought that I was getting an ulcer, worrying about the district chief wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing and how things were going. And so anyway, I was about ready to be deployed back to the United States, and the province senior advisor wanted me to sit down with a Vietnamese officer and go through the quarterly update with him. So we went through, and I started showing, reflecting what happened. He said, "No, we can't do that. It'll look bad on us." And that was not surprising, because there were a lot of Americans that thought the Vietnamese army people were corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
There was a captain who was an assistant to the district chief of Vietnamese, and he was trying to get his own district up in I Corps in the northern part of the company. And the interpreter told me that he had to come up with $35,000 in order to get that.
Mm. Yeah.
When I left, he hadn't got it. Anyway, as it turned out, I got back to Saigon to come back to the United States, and I got up one morning and looked in the mirror, and my eyes were yellow and my skin was yellow. I said, "Oh, now I know what it is, hepatitis." So I was supposed to come back before Christmas,
Mm-hmm.
but they put me in the hospital, and I was there for a week.
Mm.
Was able to call my wife and tell them I'm not coming home for Christmas.
Yeah. Oh no.
So
Well, can you talk a little bit about kind of from your view in this last tour? And you had the perspective of 3 tours, but they're very spread out. So you kind of saw the war at different points, and it seems like it's a different conflict in the early 70s. Can you kind of talk about kind of your perspective on it then?
Yeah. Well, the this district senior advisor and province senior advisor course at the U.S. Department of State Foreign Service Institute was I was given to believe was part of the Nixon Vietnamization program that we're trying to get the Vietnamese to do more and more and more, and us getting less and less and less and less involved. And from the perspective of Kowloon District and Phong Province, that seemed to be working. The district just north of me, they had a U.S. Department of State Foreign Service officer as their district senior advisor, and he went back to go back to the United States, and my boss, the province senior advisor, or colonel, asked me to go up and told me to go up, and coordinate with the.
They don't ask you.
Coordinate with the district chief up there to see what he needed, how things were going, and so forth. So when I went up there, I drove, and I had my interpreter with me. We drove, 20 miles. We were armed, but, wasn't any problem, which is, I probably drove around sometimes where I shouldn't have, but nothing happened. So it seemed to be working. Now, other parts, I can't speak for, what else was going on in other parts of the country. I know that that while I was there, that third tour, there was another major that went through the Foreign Service Institute course, and he was assigned to a district also in the Delta, and one of his outposts got hit, and he went to, I think they went to try to relieve the siege, so to speak, and he was killed in action. So you just never know.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the end of this third tour, and then kind of your transition back stateside. You don't get back till January, I guess. You missed Christmas, and where do you come back to, and then what's next for you?
My assignment was as the active Army advisor to the National Guard Battalion here in Waco. And when I got back, I got on the phone with the infantry branch. I guess it was after when I was medevac back to the United States. I was on a C-141 Starlifter aircraft, and I was on a stretcher, and I went to an Air Force base down in San Antonio for several days, and then I was on convalescent leave. No, then up to Darnell Army Hospital at Fort Hood, and then home for convalescent leave. And I got on the branch on the telephone with the infantry branch, and said I wanted to go someplace else. I don't want a National Guard advisor thing. Well, he said that's where you're going, and it's an airborne infantry battalion right here in Waco, Texas. 3rd Battalion, Airborne 143rd Infantry. Part of the, at that time, the Texas National Guard had the 71st Airborne Brigade. And so you're going there, and we need qualified experienced airborne officers. So, well, looks like I'm going to get back on jump status, which was good. So that's why I wound up coming up here. And then, so I got back on jump status. We got here in February of 1972. I got back on jump status, and finally got enough jumps to get what they call the master parachuter's badge. You have to have at least 65 jumps. I got that, and then we got word that they're reactivating the 49th Armored Division, and so I asked to stay on. I didn't want to keep moving my family around, and so they said, you can stay on. So I stayed on. It became the Armored Cavalry Squadron of the 49th Armored Division. It's still the Army Cavalry Squadron, but now it's part of the 36th Infantry Division. So it's the same. So that's where I wound up.
So how did you find Waco as a place to end up as a New York native?
Yeah, I liked it. I became a resident of Texas, official Texas citizen. And Waco was a nice town. We still have the house in Austin, and we figured that
This is her family's house in Austin?
well, that is the house that my wife bought when she came back, left Fort Bragg
I see.
after her
Okay.
husband was killed. So,
Yeah.
so we still have that house, and we figured that we'd eventually wind up there. But then we just decided to. The kids were in school and everything. We didn't want to move, so we stayed here, and really no regrets at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's a large enough town to offer all the things you'd probably want,
Mm-hmm.
and but small enough to avoid the big traffic jams that you find down in Austin. If you want big city life, Dallas 100 miles north, Austin 100 miles south,
Mm-hmm.
San Antonio and Houston 180 miles down
Mm-hmm.
the road and so forth. So
The as a Vietnam veteran, one of the things that I think you think about is transitioning back to civilian life once you've been in country and you've been in conflict. How did that go for you? That transition to
yeah, it was no problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a job with Metropolitan Life Insurance Company as an agent,
Mm-hmm.
and wasn't particularly successful. I was not spectacularly successful, but I hung in there,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a good experience, and
Mhm.
and I learned a lot about finances and stuff like that, and that's where I met Manuel Sesteta, who got me involved with the Vietnam Veterans Memorial here.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about how that initiated, and I know we lost Manuel here recently. Well, I guess it's been over a year ago now.
He
but yeah,
died
yeah.
May 30th of last year.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about him
Yeah.
and also kind of how you got involved in this work of the
Well, Manuel was a Marine.
mm-hmm.
He was assigned to the 3rd Marine Division on Okinawa, and when the division deployed to Vietnam in March of 1965, he was a part of that.
Okay.
And he spent a year in Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know what happened to him after that, but he finally then was discharged. And he was born and raised here in Waco,
Mm-hmm.
and he had a couple jobs, and then went to work for Metropolitan Life Insurance. Was very successful, as it turned out. And he knew I was a Vietnam veteran. I knew he was a Vietnam veteran. And one day in 1987, the fall of '87, he said he and some other guys were sitting down at a bar talking, and they said, "Well, we came up with an idea. Why don't we look into building a Vietnam Veterans Memorial here in Waco?" And he said, "Would you like to get involved?" And I didn't hesitate. I said, "Sure." And my main inspiration was Dave Reagan, who I told you about, the guy
Mm-hmm.
who was killed in Vietnam while I was in pre-deployment training in Okinawa. So we got some other people involved, and we had an initial meeting at the there was a Ramada Inn at Valley Mills Drive and Franklin,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a meeting there, and I think about 10 people showed up, and some of them were some family members of people who were killed in Vietnam. It was advertised in the paper, and I remember there was a World War II veteran there from Clifton, if I'm not mistaken, and he said, "You guys would be lucky if you raise $100." Well, that didn't deter us a bit, so
So why do you think he said that?
I don't know, but it could have been it just could have been, maybe he was still thinking of the anti-Vietnam War sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he was thinking about that, even though this was some years later.
Yeah.
Um,
And this is after the National Memorial had been
yeah,
dedicated.
yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
So we decided to, from that meeting, we decided to press on. So 4 of us, Manuel, myself, Robert Gamboa, and Raymond Tovar, went and met with the city council. And David Sibley was mayor, and we made a presentation saying we'd like to build a Vietnam Veterans Memorial here in Waco. And to simplify things, their question was, what's it going to look like? And we said, we don't know what it's going to look like till we know where it's going to go. And he said, well, we can't tell you where it's going to go till we know what it's going to look like.
Yeah, at that point, you only had a list of names, right? You just had a list of.
We had 45 names.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of our guys came up with 45 names.
Mm-hmm.
And
that was servicemen from Waco and McLennan County.
Yeah.
That had been lost in the war.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were basically, the city council said, well, go ahead and proceed with your planning and organization and so forth, and keep us advised. And I'd known a guy, I knew of a guy, Guy Cox, his name is an attorney here in Waco. And for a while he was a Vietnam veteran, was with the Marine Corps Reserve Unit here. And I remember he came to a meeting of the Professional Life Insurance Association meeting here one time, dealing with Toys for Tots, to encourage our participation in Toys for Tots. So I knew of him, and I went and talked with him, and says he's a lawyer, and I said, would you get involved with this? He said, sure. So he thankfully drew up a constitution, bylaws, and so forth, and we were and submitted it, and that was approved in the state of Texas in December of 1987.
Mm-hmm.
This other stuff was October, November time frame.
So this is to create the nonprofit to raise the money for the
so
memorial.
That was we call it the Waco Citizens for Vietnam Veterans Memorial Incorporated.
Mm-hmm.
And so once we got our corporation, that was submitted to the IRS as well, then we applied for 501c3 status, and sometime later we got that, which cleared the way for us to go out and raise money. And in the meantime, we were looking to where are we going to put this thing. We had in mind an area across from the Honda River, right at the intersection of Franklin and what is now Martin Luther King.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a nice big grassy area there, and our map said Indians
on the riverside there. On the riverside of that intersection there, kind of on the suspension bridge side, I think you showed me.
Yeah, well, but it was on down to Franklin.
Yeah.
And the maps we had said Indian Spring Park East.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we had even, I think, I can't remember what it was. Could have been around Memorial Day of 1988. We even set up a big tent out there, and KWTX broadcast for 45 hours from there, for the 45 men. The DJ was out there and so forth.
Mm.
We had a gathering and stuff like that, and started raising money. And and another thing we did was to get together a project to get designs. I had a design contest, and somehow I got involved with Bill Dietz from Dietz Memorial.
Mm-hmm.
And he agreed to help, and so he put together a committee. I sat in on it. I was not a voting member of the committee, but I sat in on the committee. I remember we had a young lady who was part of the Parks and Recreation Department, and he was there, and we had an architect, I don't recall his name, but he was there, and we had several other people there. And we asked for designs, and I think we had about maybe 8 to 10 designs were submitted.
Mm-hmm.
And we kept the identity of the people hidden from the committee,
mm-hmm.
so they were basing their evaluations on the design and not on who submitted it.
Mm-hmm.
And we came up with one that looked pretty good. One of the criteria was that we wanted some centerpiece to where we could name the people who were killed.
Mm-hmm.
We also wanted to have a gathering area.
Mm-hmm.
And so we came up with design, and he set it for that area at Franklin and what is now MLK. And as it turned out, unbeknownst to us at that time, this was actually part of Martin Luther King Park. And members of the community did not appreciate a Vietnam Veterans Memorial going in there because Martin Luther King was against the war.
Yeah.
And we really pushed to get in there, and we finally came before the city council, and one of the councilmen, unfortunately I don't recall his name. He's passed away since then, but he knew Manuel quite well, and he moved that made a motion that we be allowed to put a mobile home at that place.
So because it was an alternate, it had been identified as an alternate site.
Well, no,
where it is
that
right
was
now.
the one we wanted.
Okay.
Again, across the river
Yeah.
from right there at Martin Luther King and Franklin, and that great big grassy area. And so this councilman moved that we be given that property, and the motion died for lack of a second. So the mayor appointed some people from what was the Parks and Recreations Commission is what it was, and he tasked them with finding us another location. So they set about doing that, and they came up with three locations. Their first choice was right across Franklin, from that right to Franklin and what is now MLK. I think it was Lake Brazos Drive at that time. It was an area that sloped down. There was a lot of trees there.
On the other side of Franklin from the original location.
Yeah. And it was close to a bridge where the train would go across and blow its whistle. The second one was where the Doris Miller Memorial is now located.
Yeah.
And the third one is where we're at University Parks in Washington. And so we kept pressing for the third choice, and they kept pressing for this commission kept pressing for the first choice. And as I understand it, the way it came out, Sam Jack McClassen, who at that time was one of the councilmen at a council meeting, said, "Look, you've been messing around with these people long enough. Give them what they want and let them get going on the thing." So the council voted okay. So that's how we wound up with our memorial location.
How did the community respond to the effort, both fundraising and the publicity effort for it?
First of all, the Waco Tribune Herald was very supportive. John Young was the editorial page editor at that time, and he was very, very supportive of it. I think it's fair to say, in my opinion, the only response we got were from Vietnam veterans and the families of the people that were killed that were still here, or that died in Vietnam that were still here. I think that was pretty much it. We had a lot of fundraising efforts, bake sales and whatnot, and there was a country and western band that had a benefit dance for us at it was a VW post that is no longer there out in the Lacey Lakeview area. And so forth, but it was just a long, drawn-out process. And in the meantime, we were receiving requests that we add additional names for the ones we already had. And one of the people, I don't recall the lady's name, but matter of fact, I just saw her recently. She was at Connolly Air Force Base with her husband, and they had a son, and he deployed to Vietnam. They stayed here in Waco, and he died in Vietnam. And she asked us to add his name, and so he wasn't from Waco proper, but he'd been here. So we decided to establish the criteria that in order for a name to appear, that first of all, it has to be under law in Washington, D.C. Secondly, there has to be some kind of tie to the city of Waco. And that was the obvious tie there. They were stationed at Connolly, and the family was still here. And so we added more names, and actually that's how we those names were added to the I think the 45 that we had for the basic stone in there. Another example was I got a call from a lady, a family we've known ever since we moved here, that her older son was married to a young lady. They were living here in Waco now, and her dad died in Vietnam. Would we add his name? And the tie to Waco was the fact that his daughter was living here.
Mm-hmm.
And so we said yes. I found out years later that during his high school years, he had been at the Methodist home.
Oh, wow.
So it, really established it.
Yeah, he had a Waco connection, deeper than that. Yeah.
So,
do you remember what the fundraising goal, what y'all needed to raise for it?
I don't. It was, I think it's several $100,000. But what basically happened was that one of the sisters, or a sister of one of the guys that was killed in Vietnam, was working for a CPA here in Waco,
Mm-hmm.
who also did CPA work for the charities that were running bingo. At that time, it was New Road Bingo,
Mm-hmm.
which is not there anymore.
Yeah.
So we had that gave us an opportunity to set up a bingo operation there. So we applied for that license, and I think we had it for 6 calendar quarters. For the first 4, we made a lot of money. Bingo is expensive. You gotta make money because you got to pay the help, the people that work in the home. You got to pay the state a certain amount at the end of each quarter and so forth. So for the first 4 quarters, we made a whole lot of money, and then the last 2 quarters, we were operating at a loss. We decided at that time it was time to end it with a healthy profit overall. So we did that. So that gave us a lot of cash.
I see.
Maybe 200,000 or 300,000. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
And in the meantime, plans were underway for the new location, and that was the guy that won the original design was redesigned it for us, which we see out there now.
Mm-hmm.
And we were pretty much on the verge of doing it. We at a certain point, well, Guy Cox also, he was friends with Bob Wallace of Wallace Engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked Bob if Bob would pitch in with his expertise and his company, and Bob said he would. So they did the engineering part, and at a certain point, they said, okay, you're going to have to build this in 2 phases, because we needed to get something there. People were starting to get discouraged. Emmanuel came up with an idea of sponsor a name. At that time, we had 60 names.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get a family, an individual, a company, a club, an organization to sponsor a name for $1,000, that'd be at least $60,000.
Mm-hmm.
And but the people were getting discouraged. You're not making progress fast enough, and matter of fact, I belonged to American Legion Post 121, and they gave us $1,000, and I knew the president or the commander of that post. His wife worked with me with Metropolitan Life Insurance. She was an office lady.
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point, I got a call from him and said, we want to get our money back. We'll hold it, and when you're ready to build, then we'll give it back to you. And we decided, no, we're not going to give it back.
Mm-hmm.
People get in that track, who knows how much
Yeah.
we're going to get back and so forth. And finally, we got to a point where we went ahead and built the first phase, which was the wall right there at the intersection of Washington and University Parks, and the plaza inside,
Mm-hmm.
and the branches of the five.
It's got the insignias.
Insignia,
yeah.
and the Veterans Plaza plaque,
Mm-hmm.
and those concrete benches in there. And so we got that built. I think we got that completed, if I'm not mistaken, 1999 maybe.
It'd be 1989, because 1990, I think, is when it wasn't it dedicated in 90?
It took us from incorporation to completion being the second phase, 15 years and 9 months.
Okay.
So that was done, and then we, at one point, Manuel and I went before the tax increment financing
Mm-hmm. Yeah, TIF.
board. Yeah. And we asked them for a donation for $50,000. And Manuel started to describe things, and I said, Manuel, you don't need to talk. You got it. So we got, and that put us over the top to be able to complete the.
Yeah, so it was fully completed and dedicated in 2004, right?
Yeah, it was end of September 2003. It was fully completed. Then we set about organizing a real formal dedication, and it took quite a bit of effort, quite a bit of planning. We had 2 gigantic tents out there on University Park Drive to block traffic off and everything, and we had a nice formal dedication, and that's what put us in.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about the design, and I was hoping what you could do if someone's listening to this and they're standing on that Veterans Plaza that you just mentioned. It's kind of up the hill near Franklin, so they can see the insignia. Talk a little bit about that plaza, and then if you don't mind walking us down through the flow of the memorial.
Well, one of the things that we had in mind when we asked for the design and really insisted on, if we want something to recognize everybody that went to Vietnam. There is in San Antonio a very nice statue. It's downtown San Antonio, not near the Riverwalk, but downtown San Antonio, of a Marine that's been shot. It's a very large statue. It's shot, and he's laying on his back, and another Marine is, I think, leaning down to feel if he has a pulse or something like that. And okay, well, that's great for all the infantrymen, and I was an infantryman. That's great for all the infantrymen. One of the guys we were talking to said, well, you need to get a Huey helicopter in there. And when I think of Vietnam, he was a Vietnam veteran, so I think of Hueys. Well, of course you do. So do I. But we wanted something to recognize everybody, besides the grunts on the ground, so to speak. So that's how we came up with the idea of the branches, the 5 military branches of service. And the Coast Guard, in fact, did have a presence in Vietnam. So that's how we did that. So that our intent was to recognize everybody there.
And, and is the hope with the benches there that someone might spend some time there, kind of reflecting, or?
Yeah, well, that and the fact that we wanted an area where people could gather, so that would also provide seating as well. So that was the plaza, and it had that straight wall with the seals of the branches of service, and then the curved part of the wall, and in that curved part, looking inside at the plaza, is a plaque identifying this as Veterans Plaza. And the way that came about is Manuel Ceteda went to Herb Reynolds, who I think was a retired Air Force Reserve officer, Lieutenant Colonel, and asked for a donation from Baylor. And President Reynolds said, well, I'm paraphrasing, this is what I understood. I wasn't there. Said, is there some way you can expand this beyond Vietnam? So that's how we came up with the Veterans Plaza. It's dedicated to all those who came before us and those who came after us, is the way that reads right there. And what turned out there was apparently he put out the word to staff and faculty to make donations if they wanted to, and we got about $5,000 worth of donations from individual Baylor people, not from the university itself, and that helped. Very much appreciated. So that was Veterans Plaza, and then perhaps the more meaningful part are the 3 pavilions. You leave the plaza and walk down through a grove of Yopon holly trees. The guy that designed it, his idea was a Yopon holly for every individual that we had named on there. And you don't look at a particular tree and say, okay, that belongs to Joe Blow or Jim Smith or whatever, just one tree per person. And so the idea is you go down to this grove of Yopon holly trees. So the first pavilion you come to is called The Beginning, and it's a four concrete pillars with a roof, and it's a pavilion. And that represents our country and our way of lives before the Vietnam War. And proceed further through the grove.
And I think it says we were whole. It says the kind of the phrase that it uses.
Before the Vietnam War.
Yeah, we were whole. Yeah.
And then the second pavilion is the first pavilion torn down. There are parts of pillars standing and parts of pillars laying on the ground there. And that's the conflict. And the in front of that is a concrete piece of concrete with a plaque that says, I think it says
I've got it here. The Vietnam War brought destruction and turmoil.
Yeah, exactly. So that represents the war itself.
Mm-hmm.
And you go further on down, and you come to the third pavilion, which looks like the first pavilion, but they have cracks where it looks like where the pillars were put back together again. And it's at an angle. The axis is at an angle compared with the axis of the other two pavilions.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the honor, where we're honoring the people that were killed. And
that one reads, just so we'll have it, the sacrifices of those we honor make this hallowed ground. Let us strive to reunite and heal. Right. So the idea that it's put back together, but it's changed.
Yeah. It's put at an angle to signify that no matter what happened, we'll never be back the way we were before the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here we are, year 2021. Who thinks about that anymore?
Mm-hmm.
It meant a lot to us at that time.
Mm-hmm. As a historian, I think about it a lot, and I do think we're forever changed by it. Now, one thing that's down near that third pavilion is there's an empty. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. That empty tree ring it's empty for a purpose. That tree ring, which is empty, is to signify or in remembrance of those who are missing in action. And so that's it. And it's right there, right next to the third pavilion.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the back side, we have inscribed St. Francis of Assisi's Prayer for Peace, which if you read through it and then think about the honor and all that, it really makes a lot of sense, the wording of that.
Mm-hmm.
St. Francis of Assisi's Prayers for Peace.
Yeah. And that pavilion has, that third pavilion has the names listed.
Yeah.
And then I know y'all have added names since that dedication.
Yeah. We added, we have added names, I think, 3 or 4 times. And I tried to write down how many names we added at different times, and I'm not successful, except for the last time we added names, which was, let me start off. Joe Phipps of Phipps Memorial has also been very supportive of our effort. And he donated those 2 benches that are down by that third pavilion. And when we wanted to add more names, other than the initial 60 that were there, we didn't have space. So I went to talk to Joe Phipps, and he says, we can put wings on either side of those. And one wing will add additional names. The other wing, we want some inscription, which we did an inscription from, I think, Patrick Henry.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we could add additional names there. And Phipps Memorial engraved them. Joe Phipps donated those 2 pieces and donated the labor to add the names on about 4 or 5 different occasions. And the last one, Robert Gamboa, who is a Vietnam veteran and our corporate historian, Vietnam Veterans Memorial historian, did some research, and he found 7 Baylor alumni that died in Vietnam. Now, one of the names from earlier that we added was also in Vietnam, but these are additional group of 7, and so.
And their connection was they had attended Baylor.
Exactly, exactly, yeah. And so he worked with the Veterans Liaison Officer and to get how we're going to do this, and we identified the people, got their names put on, and we're fortunate enough to have arranged. We had the money to arrange for a dedication meeting at the Waco Convention Center which was attended by about 150 people. And we had a president attended, which we're very grateful for.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went over and walked over to the memorial and unveiled those 7 names. And through the efforts of the university, every one of those 7 names had family representatives present.
Mm.
And they were kind enough to put them on a bus. They had some kind of a gathering, their social gathering before they came over. They came over on the bus to the convention center. And we went through that procedure.
Mm. Yeah, as we talk about the design, I'm wondering just your thoughts on how you want the community interacting with that, or, I mean, what do you hope the life of that is, as someone who was in Vietnam and had friends and lost friends in Vietnam and was involved in the effort. What role do you hope that has in the ongoing life of the community?
Well, it is there, and I'm personally gratified by this situation. It is there for people to use, not only to go to tour through it and stuff like that, but that plaza is there for people to use. And what primarily is what was being used is veterans events. The China, we have an annual Veterans Day parade. We didn't have one last November because of the COVID, but we expect to have one this November. And normally there are about 11, 12, 13 high school bands that march in that. One of them is the China Spring High School Band, about 150 strong, 130 to 150 if I'm not mistaken. And early on, even before, I don't know, maybe 1990 maybe, or sometime, give or take a year, they were lining up on the side street, one of the numbered side streets, before the parade. They were playing the Battle of the Green Berets. And I looked at that, being Special Forces. And what they've been doing was, after the parade, they would put their instruments away and go down to the memorial. And their band leader would talk to them, and they would lay carnations throughout the entire memorial.
Oh, wow.
And I have a picture from Waco Tribune Herald back then of 2 of those, and this is when the names of the first 60 were still in a granite piece that was in the plaza before it had been moved to the 3rd Pavilion. And there were two girl band students there were standing there arm in arm with tears just streaming down their face.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, that's been going on every year.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's gratifying that they can go down there. And our Special Forces Association here has now for the past several years, have been awarding awards to an outstanding male band student, a senior, and female band student, senior, and awards to the drum majors and stuff like that. So that's one thing. When the 7 names were unveiled, the Baylor people were unveiled. That was March the 29th of 1998. No.
That it was not that long ago. I mean,
no, it was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And that March the 29th is now National Vietnam War Veterans Day.
Mm-hmm.
So that was done on that particular day. So this year there's a gathering down there just to mark that time.
On March 29th?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the McLennan County Veterans Association and the VA have been putting on an annual Memorial Day ceremony at the Avenue of Flags at the VA hospital here in Waco. That was not done this past Memorial Day because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But the Veterans Association put together, they had been for several years, the Friday before Memorial Day, having what they call a Sunset Memorial Observance at the memorial. And they had people read the names that we have there every year, and then people were invited to come forward and call the names of any veterans that passed away over the past year. And so that's another thing that's been done.
Wow.
And then on Veterans Day of last year, because there's no Veterans Day parade, there was a gathering down there, just kind of an informal gathering.
Mm-hmm.
I also have been given to understand that some ladies, I think they were the Democratic ladies of Waco, had a memorial service or some type of memorial observance for those who had died of COVID at the plaza.
Mm. So it's got to be gratifying for you to see the community interacting with it that way,
exactly.
particularly in remembrance of veterans.
Yeah. I'm something else, and this is probably not closely related to your question, but when we set up to have the big dedication ceremony in May of 2004, we were looking for people to participate. The police chief of Belle Meade, Bob Harold, who was a Vietnam veteran, we decided to ask him to do the Pledge of Allegiance, lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Mm. And he agreed to do that, and he showed up. And when he stood up to give the Pledge of Allegiance, his opening remarks like, "Thank God somebody has finally done something here in Waco to recognize us as Vietnam veterans." Mm.
Do you think it's especially important for Vietnam veterans to have this? I mean, we in your oral history that you did with us, you talked about the World War II memorial and other memorials that have been done. But do you feel like it's especially important for vets from Vietnam?
Yes, I think it's important for vets of all wars. It's my opinion, and I think I'm correct in this, that the first memorial in Washington, D.C., war memorial, if you will, was the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And look at what's happened since then. Mm-hmm. The Korean War, Veteran Memorial, World War II, which is long overdue. Mm-hmm. And they're talking about, maybe I think they're talking about World War I and something mm-hmm. like that. And of course, here in Waco, we've got several memorials. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's good. And once we years down the road, who knows? But hopefully, people will continue to stop by there and mm-hmm. and have a look and so forth.
Well, I think it's great to have it on our landscape, and when it's part of the landscape, it's there. Yeah. So it's there for people to interact with and remember. So
I thought that going back to how we got that location, mm-hmm. if we were starting out, if that wasn't there, we were starting out today, I wouldn't be surprised if we were denied that location. With everything else that's going on in Waco, and how downtown's building up, and Magnolia and all that kind of stuff, mm-hmm. and the new Baylor Stadium and everything else that's going on.
Yeah, I'm glad you got a place of prominence, because it would have been harder to get now. Yeah. Major Householder, I want to thank you for your service. I want to thank you for the opportunity to visit with you again today, contributing your oral history and for your work on this memorial that you did. It's a great service to the community.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you very much for your time.
Cross the Brazos and Waco, ride hard and I'll make it by dawn.
Thanks for listening to the Waco History Podcast. Like what you heard? Subscribe, rate, and review our show on iTunes so we can reach more listeners. You can find show notes and info on every episode at wacohistorypodcast.com, and more info on Waco's past at wacohistory.org. Our theme music, used with permission, is Cross the Brazos at Waco, performed by the late Billy Walker. For more info on Billy's music, go to billywalker.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
This has been a Rogue Media podcast.